The helicopter blades cut through the humid night air above the Somali coastline as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun adjusted her night vision goggles and checked her weapon for the third time. The black water below reflected nothing but darkness, and somewhere in that maze of fishing villages and pirate strongholds, their target waited. Abdul Hassan Kismayo, the warlord who had terrorized shipping lanes for over 2 years, was finally within reach. Sarah's team of 8 Navy SEALs had been preparing for this mission for 6 months. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered, yet she knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy. The intelligence reports painted a clear picture of Kismayo's compound, a fortified building surrounded by loyal fighters, situated on the edge of a small coastal town where innocent civilians went about their daily lives, unaware that tonight would change everything. The team leader, Commander Jake Morrison, spoke through the comm system, his voice barely audible above the rotor noise. 2 minutes to drop zone. Remember, this is a precision strike. We go in quiet, neutralize the target, and extract before anyone knows we were there. Sarah nodded, though she felt the familiar knot of tension in her stomach that came before every dangerous mission. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Sarah thought about the path that had brought her here. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, she had never imagined she would one day be part of the most elite fighting force in the world. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had always told her that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Those words echoed in her mind as she prepared to rappel into hostile territory. The SEAL teams had been tracking Kismayo for months, following a trail of hijacked vessels and ransomed crews across the Indian Ocean. The warlord had made himself wealthy by preying on international shipping, but his latest target had been a humanitarian vessel carrying medical supplies to drought-stricken regions of East Africa. That attack had crossed the line, and now the full weight of American military might was focused on bringing him to justice. Sarah's specialty was close-quarters combat and reconnaissance, skills she had honed through years of rigorous training and real-world operations. She had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, always proving herself equal to her male counterparts, though she often felt the weight of additional scrutiny. Every mistake was magnified, every success questioned. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, she was just another SEAL with a job to do. The helicopter hovered 30 feet above a patch of scrubland about 2 miles from Kismayo's compound. One by one, the team members rappelled down the thick ropes, their boots touching Somali soil with barely a sound. Sarah went forth in the sequence, her descent controlled and precise. The moment her feet hit the ground, she unhooked from the rope and took up a defensive position, scanning the darkness for any signs of enemy movement. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, a mixture of rocky outcroppings and sparse vegetation that offered little cover. The team moved in single file, Sarah taking point alongside Morrison as they navigated toward their objective. Every step was calculated, every shadow potentially concealing a threat. The weight of their equipment, weapons, ammunition, communication gear, and medical supplies was distributed across their bodies with practiced efficiency. As they approached the outskirts of the village, the team split into 2 groups. Morrison led 4 SEALs around the eastern approach, while Sarah took command of the remaining 3 to circle in from the west. This was the moment she had trained for, leading other elite warriors into battle against a dangerous enemy. The responsibility was enormous, but her confidence was solid. The village was quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog or the distant sound of a generator. Most of the residents were asleep, unaware that foreign soldiers were moving through their streets with lethal purpose. Sarah's team moved like ghosts, using hand signals to communicate and staying in the shadows of mud brick buildings that lined the narrow alleys. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the target compound ahead. It was larger than the surrounding buildings, with high walls topped with razor wire and guard towers at each corner. Intelligence had indicated that Kismayo kept a force of about 20 fighters with him at all times, men who were loyal not just to his cause, but to the money he paid them. Sarah keyed her radio with a soft click, signaling that her team was in position. A moment later, Morrison's voice crackled softly through her earpiece. Alpha team in position. Tango confirmed in building. Multiple heat signatures on thermal. Execute in 60 seconds. The final minute stretched like an hour as Sarah's team prepared for the assault. She checked her weapon one last time, a modified M4 carbine equipped with a suppressor and advanced optics. Her teammates, Petty Officer Rodriguez, Petty Officer Thompson, and Chief Petty Officer Williams, were equally prepared. Each man was a veteran of multiple combat deployments, and Sarah had complete trust in their abilities. The compound's main gate was heavily fortified, but intelligence had identified a weak point in the eastern wall where erosion had undermined the foundation. Sarah's team would exploit that vulnerability while Morrison's group created a diversion at the front entrance. The plan was textbook SEAL operations, fast, violent, and overwhelming. At exactly 0247 hours, the mission began. Morrison's team initiated contact with the guards at the main gate, using suppressed weapons to neutralize the sentries before they could raise an alarm. Simultaneously, Sarah led her team through the breach in the eastern wall. The compound's courtyard was bathed in shadows, with several vehicles parked near the main building and smaller structures scattered around the perimeter. Sarah moved with deadly precision, her training taking over as she advanced toward the target building. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated to maximize their advantage while minimizing risk to civilians. The weight of command sat heavily on her shoulders, but she pushed forward with the confidence that came from years of preparation. The first floor of the building appeared to be living quarters for Kismayo's fighters. Sarah's team cleared each room systematically, finding 3 men asleep and neutralizing them silently before they could alert others. The efficiency was brutal, but necessary. Any noise would compromise the entire operation and potentially lead to a prolonged firefight in the middle of a civilian area. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Sarah heard the muffled sound of automatic weapons fire from somewhere else in the compound. Morrison's team had encountered resistance, which meant their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. She gestured to her teammates, and they picked up the pace while maintaining their tactical discipline. The second floor contained what appeared to be Kismayo's personal quarters and office space. Intelligence had suggested he would be found here, surrounded by maps of shipping routes and communications equipment used to coordinate his piracy operations. Sarah's heart rate increased as they approached the final rooms where their target was most likely hiding. Rodriguez took point as they approached the largest room at the end of the hallway. The door was reinforced steel, but their breaching charges would make short work of it. Sarah positioned herself to the right of the door while Thompson and Williams covered the hallway behind them. Every second counted now. They needed to find Kismayo and complete the mission before enemy reinforcements arrived. The explosive charge detonated with a controlled blast that sent the door flying inward. Sarah was through the breach within seconds, her weapon up and ready as she scanned the room for threats. What she saw inside would change everything. The room was empty except for communication equipment and maps, but a trapdoor in the floor stood open, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness below. Kismayo had escaped into what appeared to be an underground network that intelligence had failed to detect. The mission parameters suddenly became much more complicated. Sarah made a split-second decision that would define the rest of the operation. Instead of calling for extraction and allowing the target to escape through his tunnel system, she decided to pursue him underground. It was a calculated risk that went against standard operating procedures, but she knew this might be their only chance to eliminate a man responsible for countless acts of piracy and terrorism. She keyed her radio to inform Morrison of the situation, but static filled her earpiece. The underground location was interfering with communications, which meant she and her team were now operating without backup or coordination with the other half of their unit. The tunnel ahead disappeared into darkness, and somewhere in that subterranean maze, one of the most wanted men in East Africa was trying to escape justice. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped through the trapdoor into the tunnel below. Her night vision goggles revealed a crude but extensive network of passages that had obviously been prepared as an escape route. The walls were reinforced with wooden planks, and the floor was packed earth that showed recent footprints heading deeper into the network. Rodriguez followed her down, then Thompson and Williams. The four SEALs found themselves in a completely different environment from the compound above. The tunnels were narrow, forcing them to move in single file, and the air was thick with humidity and the smell of earth. Their tactical advantage had been neutralized. Down here, they were vulnerable to ambush and had limited maneuverability. Sarah took point as they moved through the tunnel system, following the footprints and occasional drops of blood that indicated their quarry had been wounded in the initial assault. The passages branched in several directions, creating a maze that could easily trap unwary pursuers. But Sarah's training had prepared her for situations like this, and she trusted her instincts to guide them toward their target. The tunnel network was more extensive than anyone had imagined. As they moved deeper underground, Sarah began to understand that Kismayo had invested significant time and resources into creating this escape route. The passages were well constructed and showed evidence of regular use, suggesting that the Warlord had been preparing for exactly this type of assault for months or even years. After 20 minutes of careful advancement, the team reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged. Fresh blood on the ground indicated that Kismayo had paused here, probably to treat a wound or decide which route to take. Sarah studied the evidence carefully, using her tracking skills to determine which path their target had chosen. The leftmost tunnel showed the most recent disturbance, with footprints heading toward what appeared to be a natural cave system beyond the man-made passages. Sarah made the decision to follow that route, knowing that each minute of delay increased the chances that Kismayo would escape into the vast wilderness of the Somali interior. As they moved deeper into the underground network, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. Kismayo hadn't survived this long by being careless, and it was entirely possible that he had prepared defensive positions throughout the tunnel system. Every step forward increased their vulnerability, but retreat wasn't an option. Too much depended on completing this mission successfully. The tunnel began to slope downward more steeply, and Sarah could hear the sound of water ahead. The passage was leading them toward the coast, where Kismayo might have boats waiting to carry him to safety across the Indian Ocean. If he reached the water, the mission would be a failure, and the Warlord would simply relocate his operations to another area where he could continue terrorizing international shipping. Sarah pushed forward with renewed urgency, her team maintaining their tactical formation despite the challenging environment. The sound of water grew louder, and she could smell salt air mixed with the earthy odor of the tunnels. They were approaching the coast, which meant their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The tunnels suddenly opened into a large underground chamber that appeared to be part natural cave and part artificial excavation. Moonlight filtered down through several openings in the ceiling, revealing a space large enough to hold dozens of people. More importantly, Sarah could see another tunnel entrance on the far side of the chamber that clearly led toward the water. As her team spread out to secure the chamber, Sarah spotted movement near the far tunnel. A figure in dark clothing was trying to reach the exit, moving with the careful gait of someone who had been wounded. Through her night vision goggles, she could clearly identify the distinctive features that matched their intelligence photos. They had found Abdul Hassan Kismayo. The Warlord was alone, his bodyguards apparently lost in the confusion of the initial assault. He was carrying a small bag that probably contained documents or money, and his left arm appeared to be injured. This was the moment Sarah had trained for, the culmination of months of preparation and years of service to her country. She raised her weapon and called out in Arabic, ordering Kismayo to stop and surrender. The Warlord turned toward her voice, and for a moment their eyes met across the moonlit chamber. She could see the calculation in his expression as he weighed his options: surrender and face justice, or make a final desperate attempt to escape. Kismayo's hand moved toward a weapon at his belt, and Sarah knew that the peaceful resolution she had hoped for wasn't going to happen. The next few seconds would determine whether their mission succeeded or failed, whether a dangerous terrorist would face justice or escape to continue his reign of terror across the Indian Ocean. Time seemed to slow as Sarah watched Kismayo's hand move toward his weapon. Her training kicked in automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice taking over as she adjusted her aim and prepared to engage. The moonlight streaming through the cave openings cast long shadows across the chamber, creating an almost surreal backdrop for what was about to unfold. Rodriguez had moved to her left flank while Thompson and Williams covered the other tunnel entrances, ensuring that no additional threats could emerge from the darkness. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger as she maintained her sight picture on the target. Everything she had worked for, everything her team had sacrificed to get to this point, came down to this single moment. Kismayo drew his pistol with surprising speed for a wounded man, but Sarah was faster. Her suppressed M4 coughed twice in rapid succession, the subsonic rounds finding their target with lethal precision. The warlord's weapon clattered across the stone floor as he collapsed, his reign of terror finally brought to an end in the depths of a Somali cave. Sarah advanced carefully, her weapon still trained on the fallen figure. Years of combat experience had taught her that wounded enemies could still be dangerous, and she wasn't about to let her guard down until she was certain the threat was neutralized. Rodriguez moved with her, providing cover while Thompson and Williams maintained their watch on the tunnel entrances. When they reached Kismayo's body, Sarah quickly checked for vital signs while Rodriguez secured the weapon that had fallen nearby. The warlord was dead, his documents, and whatever money he had been carrying scattered across the cave floor. The mission objective was complete, but now they faced the challenge of getting back to the surface and linking up with Morrison's team. Sarah keyed her radio, hoping that the higher elevation in the chamber might improve their communications. Static filled her earpiece for several seconds before Morrison's voice broke through, distorted but understandable. "Bravo team, report status. We've secured the compound, but couldn't locate the primary target." "Alpha Leader, this is Bravo Leader," Sarah responded. "Primary target is neutralized. We're in an underground cave system approximately 400 meters southeast of the compound. Requesting extraction guidance." She could hear the relief in Morrison's voice when he acknowledged her transmission and confirmed that helicopter extraction was being arranged at a beach landing zone about 1 kilometer from their current position. The journey back through the tunnel system proved to be more challenging than their initial pursuit. Without the urgency of chasing a fleeing target, Sarah became more aware of the oppressive atmosphere underground and the potential for structural collapse. The tunnels had been hastily constructed, and she noticed several areas where the wooden supports appeared to be failing under the weight of earth and rock above. As they retraced their steps through the maze of passages, Sarah reflected on the implications of what they had accomplished. Kismayo's death would create a power vacuum in the regional piracy network, but it would also likely lead to increased violence as rival groups fought for control of his territory and resources. The mission had achieved its immediate objective, but the larger problem of maritime terrorism in the region would continue. Thompson took point for the return journey, his expertise in underground operations proving valuable as they navigated back toward the compound. The team moved more slowly than during their pursuit, taking time to properly clear each junction and ensure they weren't walking into an ambush from any remaining loyalists who might have followed them underground. When they finally emerged from the trapdoor in Kismayo's quarters, Sarah was relieved to see Morrison and his team had secured the entire compound. The remaining guards had been neutralized or had fled during the initial assault, leaving behind weapons and documents that would provide valuable intelligence about the piracy network's operations and connections to other terrorist organizations in the region. Morrison greeted Sarah with a nod of professional respect as she climbed out of the tunnel. "Good work down there," he said simply, but she could see in his eyes that he understood the significance of what her team had accomplished. Eliminating a high-value target in such challenging circumstances was exactly the kind of operation that SEALs trained for, but few ever had the opportunity to execute. The compound search revealed the extent of Kismayo's operation. Computer hard drives contained detailed records of piracy attacks, ransom negotiations, and financial transactions that would help authorities track down the international networks that supported maritime terrorism. Maps on the walls showed shipping routes and patrol patterns, indicating a level of operational sophistication that explained why the Warlord had been so successful for so long. Sarah helped coordinate the intelligence gathering while her team prepared for extraction. The helicopter landing zone was on a beach about 15 minutes away by foot, and they needed to move quickly before local militia groups could respond to reports of fighting at the compound. The longer they remained in the area, the greater the risk of encountering organized resistance from Kismayo's allies. As they prepared to leave the compound, Sarah took one last look around the room where she had made the decision to pursue the target underground. That split-second choice had determined the success of the entire operation, and she wondered if she would have made the same decision knowing what she knew now about the risks they had faced in the tunnel system. The team moved out in tactical formation, crossing the village under cover of darkness while maintaining security around the intelligence materials they had recovered. Sarah noticed that some lights had come on in nearby buildings, suggesting that the gunfire had awakened local residents, but no one emerged to investigate. The civilians had learned long ago that it was safer to stay inside when armed groups moved through their community. The landscape between the village and the beach was rocky and uneven, requiring careful navigation to avoid injury while maintaining their rapid pace. Sarah's team had been underground for over an hour, and she could feel the fatigue beginning to affect their movement. Combat operations were physically and mentally exhausting, even for elite warriors in peak condition. As they approached the beach, Sarah could see the extraction helicopter circling offshore, its pilots maintaining a safe distance until the landing zone was confirmed secure. Morrison's team spread out to establish a defensive perimeter while Sarah's team moved to the designated pickup point, a flat section of sand about 50 meters from the water's edge. The helicopter came in fast and low, its rotors creating a sandstorm that forced the SEALs to shield their eyes and equipment from the flying debris. Sarah helped load the intelligence materials into the aircraft while her teammates provided security, their weapons trained on the approaches to the landing zone in case enemy forces attempted to interfere with the extraction. Within minutes, all 8 team members were aboard the helicopter and lifting off from the Somali coast. Sarah strapped herself into a jump seat and allowed herself a moment of relief as they gained altitude and headed toward the Naval Task Force waiting in international waters. The mission had been successful, but she knew that the real impact of their work would be measured in the months to come as intelligence agencies analyzed the materials they had recovered. The flight to the ship gave Sarah time to decompress from the intensity of combat operations. She reviewed the mission in her mind, analyzing the decisions she had made, and considering what lessons could be learned for future operations. The underground pursuit had been risky, but it had also been necessary to complete the mission objective. Sometimes leadership meant making difficult choices with incomplete information. Commander Morrison moved through the helicopter cabin, checking on each team member and conducting an informal after-action review while the events were still fresh in everyone's mind. When he reached Sarah, he sat down beside her and spoke quietly over the noise of the rotors. That was good tactical thinking down there. Following him underground was the right call. Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was already thinking about the broader implications of the mission. Kismayo's network had been disrupted, but maritime terrorism remained a significant threat in the region. The intelligence they had gathered would help identify other key figures in the piracy ecosystem, but eliminating one warlord would not solve the underlying problems that made piracy attractive to desperate young men along the Somali coast. The helicopter's destination was a guided missile destroyer that served as the command ship for counter-piracy operations in the Indian Ocean. As they approached the vessel, Sarah could see other aircraft on deck and crew members preparing to receive their team. The successful completion of a high-value target mission was significant news that would be transmitted up the chain of command to officials in Washington and other Allied capitals. Landing on the ship's deck required precise coordination between the helicopter pilots and the deck crew, who worked to guide the aircraft safely onto the landing platform despite the rolling motion of the vessel. Sarah felt the solid thump as the helicopter's wheels touched down, followed by the immediate activity of crew members moving to secure the aircraft and assist the passengers. As the team disembarked, Sarah was struck by the contrast between the intensity of combat operations ashore and the organized efficiency of naval operations at sea. The ship's crew moved with practiced precision, their activities coordinated by a complex system of procedures and protocols that kept the vessel functioning as an effective platform for military operations. The intelligence materials were immediately transferred to the ship's analysis center, where specialists would begin the process of extracting actionable information from Kismayo's records. Sarah and her teammates were escorted to a debriefing room where they would provide detailed accounts of the mission while the events were still fresh in their memories. The debriefing process was thorough and systematic, with intelligence officers asking specific questions about everything from the layout of the compound to the construction of the tunnel system. Sarah's decision to pursue the target underground received particular attention, as it represented a deviation from the planned mission profile that had ultimately proved successful. During a break in the debriefing, Sarah walked out onto the ship's deck and looked back toward the Somali coast. Now, just a dark line on the horizon. Somewhere in that direction, in villages and towns along the shoreline, young men were probably already planning new attacks on international shipping. The mission had been successful, but the war against maritime terrorism would continue. She thought about the tunnel system they had discovered, wondering how many other warlords had invested in similar escape routes and defensive preparations. The sophistication of Kismayo's operation suggested that the piracy networks were becoming more organized and professional, which meant that future counterterrorism operations would need to adapt to meet evolving threats. The ship's intelligence officer found her on deck and informed her that preliminary analysis of the recovered materials was already yielding valuable information about piracy, financing, and logistics. The computer files contained details about ransom payments, weapon purchases, and coordination with other criminal organizations that would help authorities disrupt the broader network that supported maritime terrorism. Sarah returned to her quarters, a small cabin she shared with another female officer, and began the process of writing her formal mission report. The document would become part of the official record and would be used to analyze the effectiveness of current tactics and procedures for future operations. Every detail mattered, from the timing of their movements to the weapons and equipment that had proved most useful. As she wrote, Sarah found herself focusing on the moment when she had made the decision to follow Kismayo underground. That choice had been based on training, intuition, and a deep understanding of the mission's importance, but it had also involved significant risk. She wondered if other officers in similar situations would make the same choice, or if her decision reflected something unique about her approach to leadership and tactical decision-making. The mission report took several hours to complete, as Sarah worked to capture not just the sequence of events, but also the reasoning behind key decisions and the lessons that could be learned for future operations. When she finally finished writing, she felt a sense of completion that went beyond the successful elimination of a terrorist target. That evening, the ship's captain held a brief ceremony to recognize the team's accomplishment. Sarah and her teammates stood at attention on the deck as the captain spoke about the importance of their mission and the professional excellence they had demonstrated in its execution. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, acknowledging the significance of their contribution to international security. After the ceremony, Sarah joined her teammates for a meal in the ship's dining facility. The conversation was relaxed and informal, a stark contrast to the intensity of their mission briefings and tactical planning sessions. They talked about their families, their plans for when they returned to base, and their thoughts about the next assignment that would inevitably come. Rodriguez mentioned that his wife was expecting their first child, and he was hoping for leave time when they returned to the United States. Thompson talked about his plans to attend college and study engineering after his military service ended. Williams, the most senior enlisted member of the team, shared stories about his previous deployments and the changes he had seen in special operations over his career. Sarah listened to her teammates with appreciation for the bonds that had formed during their training and operations together. These men had trusted her leadership during one of the most challenging missions any of them had faced, and their success reflected not just individual skill, but also the teamwork and mutual support that made elite military units effective. The conversation eventually turned to speculation about their next assignment. The intelligence gathered from Kismayo's operation would likely generate new targets and missions as authorities worked to dismantle the network that had supported his piracy activities. Sarah knew that her team would probably be called upon again soon, possibly for operations even more challenging than what they had just completed. As the evening wore on, Sarah excused herself and returned to deck for some fresh air and solitude. The Indian Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface reflecting the light of stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than she remembered from her childhood in Oregon. The vastness of the ocean reminded her of the scale of the challenges they faced in combating terrorism and piracy. She thought about the civilians who lived in the Somali coastal villages, trying to make honest livings in one of the most difficult environments on Earth. Many of them had probably never seen the ocean as anything but a source of fish and a highway for dangerous men with weapons. The success of tonight's mission might make their lives a little safer, but the underlying problems of poverty and instability would require solutions that went far beyond military action. The ship's night watch was changing, and Sarah could hear the quiet communications and movements of sailors taking over their duties. The vessel never slept, its crew maintaining constant vigilance against threats that could emerge from any direction at any time. She felt a sense of kinship with these sailors, who shared the burden of protecting international waters and the commerce that flowed across them. Tomorrow would bring new briefings, new intelligence reports, and new planning for future operations. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself a few moments to appreciate what they had accomplished and to remember why she had chosen to dedicate her life to serving her country in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. 3 months after the Kismayo operation, Sarah found herself back in Virginia Beach, sitting in a sterile conference room at Navy Special Warfare Command headquarters. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the polished table where senior officers and intelligence analysts had gathered to discuss the aftermath of her team's mission in Somalia. What should have been a routine debriefing had evolved into something much more complex and troubling. The intelligence recovered from Kismayo's compound had revealed connections that no one had anticipated. The piracy network extended far beyond maritime terrorism, linking to arms dealers, human traffickers, and even legitimate businesses that unknowingly facilitated criminal operations. Most disturbing of all, the investigation had uncovered evidence suggesting that someone within the American intelligence community had been providing information to the terrorists. Captain Rebecca Martinez, the briefing officer, clicked through slides showing financial transactions and communication intercepts. The forensic analysis of Kismayo's computer files indicates that his organization received advance warning about at least 3 previous counterterrorism operations, she explained, her voice carrying the weight of implications that everyone in the room understood. Someone with access to classified operational planning has been compromising our missions. Sarah listened with growing discomfort as the presentation continued. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, suggesting a pattern of leaked information that had allowed high-value targets to escape capture and had potentially cost lives among both military personnel and innocent civilians. The thought that someone in their own ranks might be betraying their missions was almost incomprehensible. Commander Morrison, who had led the overall Kismayo operation, leaned forward in his chair. "What's the timeline on these suspected leaks?" he asked. Sarah could see the same questions in his eyes that were forming in her own mind. How many of their previous operations have been compromised, and how many friends have been put at unnecessary risk because someone was selling secrets to terrorists? "The pattern goes back at least 18 months, Captain Martinez replied. "Possibly longer, but that's as far as we can trace with the current evidence." The leak appears to have access to operational planning at the JSOC level, which means it could be someone with very high clearance and broad access to information about special operations across multiple theaters. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Joint Special Operations Command coordinated the most sensitive military operations in the world, involving units from all branches of the armed forces. Someone with access to JSOC planning could compromise not just SEAL team operations, but also missions involving Delta Force, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, and Marine Corps Special Units. Sarah found herself thinking back to every mission she had participated in over the past 2 years, wondering which ones had been compromised and whether the casualties they had suffered might have been preventable. The raid on a Taliban compound in Afghanistan where they had lost Petty Officer Jackson. The failed attempt to capture a bomb maker in Iraq that had nearly cost Rodriguez's life. Could those disasters have been the result of betrayal rather than bad luck or enemy competence? "What's our role in the investigation?" Morrison asked, speaking for the entire team. Sarah appreciated his direct approach. They were operators, not investigators, and their expertise lay in executing missions rather than solving mysteries about internal security breaches. Captain Martinez closed her laptop and looked around the table at each team member. "Your mission profiles and operational history are being reviewed as part of the investigation. You may be called upon to provide additional testimony about specific operations, particularly any instances where you encountered unexpected enemy resistance or situations that seemed unusual in hindsight." The meeting concluded with instructions for the team members to remain available for further questioning and to report any suspicious contacts or attempts to elicit information about their operations. Sarah left the conference room with a heavy heart, understanding that the investigation would likely consume months and could cast suspicion on innocent personnel throughout the special operations community. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself under scrutiny that felt more intense than anything she had experienced as a woman in a male-dominated field. Investigators interviewed her repeatedly about her personal relationships, her financial situation, her political views, and her contacts with foreign nationals. The process was thorough but dehumanizing, treating her as a potential security threat rather than a decorated warrior who had risked her life repeatedly in service to her country. The investigation created an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia within the special operations community. Team members who had trusted each other with their lives now found themselves wondering if their colleagues might be feeding information to enemies. Training exercises were conducted with unusual security measures, and operational planning was compartmentalized to limit the number of personnel who had access to complete mission details. Sarah noticed that some of her colleagues began treating her differently, though whether this was because of her gender, her recent high-profile success, or simple paranoia was impossible to determine. Conversations that had once flowed naturally now seemed forced and careful, with people weighing their words as if they suspected they were being monitored or that their comments might be reported to investigators. The strain affected everyone differently. Rodriguez withdrew into himself, spending most of his off-duty time alone in his quarters rather than socializing with the team. Thompson became hyper-vigilant about security procedures, double-checking locks, and reporting minor irregularities that would normally be ignored. Williams, the team's senior enlisted leader, tried to maintain morale by organizing informal gatherings, but even these felt artificial under the cloud of the ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, the operational tempo continued without pause. New intelligence reports arrived daily, identifying potential targets and threats that required immediate attention. The war against terrorism didn't pause for internal security investigations, which meant that Sarah and her teammates had to maintain their readiness for deployment while dealing with the psychological stress of being under suspicion. 6 weeks after the initial briefing, Sarah was called to another meeting, this time with a smaller group that included only the team leaders who had participated in the Kismayo operation. The investigators had apparently narrowed their focus, concentrating on operations that had shown the clearest evidence of compromise. Agent Patricia Coleman from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service led the session, her professional demeanor masking what Sarah suspected was considerable frustration with the slow progress of the investigation. "We've identified 3 operations from the past year that show definitive signs of information leakage," she began, placing folders on the table in front of each attendee. "Your team was involved in 2 of those operations." Sarah opened her folder to find detailed timelines and analysis of the missions in question. One was the Kismayo operation, which had succeeded despite potential compromise because of their decision to pursue the target underground. The other was a failed attempt to capture a weapons dealer in Yemen, where the target had evacuated his compound just hours before the planned assault. The Yemen operation was compromised approximately 6 hours before H hour, Agent Coleman explained. Someone with access to the final mission briefing provided enough information for the target to escape with his key personnel and most sensitive materials. The timing suggests that the leak occurred during or immediately after the team leader's final briefing. Sarah remembered that briefing clearly. It had been conducted in a secure conference room with only 5 people present: herself, Morrison, the intelligence officer, the operation commander, and a representative from higher headquarters who had flown in specifically for the mission approval. One of those 5 people had apparently passed information to the enemy within hours of receiving it. The investigation was closing in on a very small circle of suspects, which meant that Sarah and her colleagues were now under intense scrutiny. Every aspect of their behavior, their communications, and their activities was being analyzed for signs of deception or security violations. The process was emotionally exhausting and professionally devastating as careers and reputations hung in the balance based on circumstantial evidence and investigative theories. Sarah found herself questioning everyone around her, including people she had served with for years and trusted with her life. The corrosive effect of suspicion was undermining the bonds of trust and loyalty that made special operations units effective. She wondered if this psychological damage was part of the enemy's strategy, whether the security breach was intended not just to compromise specific missions, but to destroy the cohesion and morale of American Special Operations Forces. During a rare moment of privacy, Morrison approached Sarah with concerns that went beyond the immediate investigation. "This thing is tearing us apart," he said quietly, checking to ensure they weren't overheard. "Even if they catch whoever's been leaking information, the damage to unit cohesion might be irreparable. People are going to remember being suspected and investigated long after the real traitor is identified." Sarah nodded, understanding his concerns, but unsure how to address them. Leadership in this situation meant maintaining unit effectiveness while cooperating with an investigation that treated everyone as potential enemies. The balance was delicate and perhaps impossible to achieve without causing lasting damage to the relationships that made their missions possible. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Agent Coleman announced that they had identified additional evidence pointing to a specific individual. Rather than one of the operation participants, the focus had shifted to a staff officer at JSOC headquarters who had access to planning documents for operations across multiple theaters. The individual had been placed under surveillance, and his communications were being monitored for evidence of treasonous activity. The revelation that the suspected traitor was outside their immediate circle brought some relief to Sarah's team, but it also raised disturbing questions about how many other operations had been compromised and how long the security breach had been ongoing. The staff officer in question had held his position for over 3 years, with access to some of the most sensitive operational planning in the military. Within days, the investigation moved to its conclusion with the arrest of Major David Hutchinson, a military intelligence officer who had been providing operational information to a network of arms dealers and terrorist organizations in exchange for substantial financial payments. The evidence against him was overwhelming, including recorded conversations and financial records that documented years of treasonous activity. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anger when she learned of Hutchinson's arrest. Relief that the investigation was over and that she and her teammates were no longer under suspicion, but anger at the betrayal and at the damage that had been done to operational security and unit morale. The major had been responsible for the deaths of American service members and the failure of missions that could have saved civilian lives. The aftermath of the investigation brought changes to operational security procedures and personnel screening processes, but it also left scars that would take years to heal. Trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild, and Sarah noticed that relationships within the special operations community remained more guarded and formal than they had been before the security breach was discovered. Sarah's own reputation had been enhanced rather than damaged by the investigation, as her decision-making during the Kismayo operation was cited as an example of adaptability and tactical excellence that had overcome enemy advantages. However, she found little satisfaction in this recognition, knowing that it had come at the cost of suspicion and division within the community she had dedicated her career to serving. The experience taught her valuable lessons about leadership in crisis situations and the importance of maintaining unit cohesion under pressure. She realized that her role as an officer extended beyond tactical proficiency to include protecting the morale and effectiveness of the people under her command, even when facing challenges that had nothing to do with enemy action. As the special operations community worked to rebuild trust and refine security procedures, Sarah prepared for her next assignment with a deeper understanding of the complexities and challenges of military service in an era of asymmetric warfare and global terrorism. The enemies they faced were not just armed with weapons and explosives, but also with sophisticated intelligence operations designed to undermine American military effectiveness from within. The investigation had ended, but its impact would influence how special operations were planned and executed for years to come. Sarah knew that future missions would be conducted with enhanced security measures and more careful screening of personnel, but she wondered if the psychological damage to unit cohesion could ever be fully repaired. She spent her final evening in Virginia Beach walking along the oceanfront, thinking about the price of security and the cost of suspicion. The waves crashed endlessly against the shore, indifferent to human struggles and betrayals, reminding her that the mission would continue regardless of the personal and professional challenges they faced. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new operations, and new opportunities to serve her country with the honor and dedication that defined her commitment to the SEAL teams. 2 years had passed since the Kismayo operation and the subsequent investigation that had shaken the special operations community. Sarah now held the rank of lieutenant commander and was leading her own SEAL team on increasingly complex missions across the globe. The intelligence gathered from the Somalia raid had yielded dozens of follow-up operations, dismantling terrorist networks and disrupting criminal organizations throughout East Africa and the Middle East. But despite her professional success, Sarah found herself struggling with questions that had begun during the investigation and had only grown more persistent with time. The military's recognition of her tactical excellence had opened doors to higher command positions and prestigious assignments, yet she increasingly felt that her accomplishments were being viewed through a lens that emphasized her gender rather than her capabilities as a warrior and leader. The issue came to a head during a promotion ceremony at Naval Special Warfare Command, where Sarah was being recognized alongside 3 male officers for exceptional performance in combat operations. The commanding officer's speech praised all 4 officers for their dedication and tactical prowess, but Sarah noticed that the media coverage focused almost exclusively on her story, with headlines emphasizing that she was breaking barriers and proving women's place in special operations. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by a reporter who wanted to interview her about the challenges of being a woman in the SEAL teams. The questions were respectful, but reflected assumptions that troubled her. that her primary significance was as a symbol rather than as a professional warrior who happened to be female. The reporter seemed more interested in her experiences with discrimination than in the tactical innovations and leadership decisions that had made her mission successful. Sarah politely declined the interview, but the encounter stayed with her as she returned to her duties. She had always known that her presence in the SEALs was historically significant, but she had hoped that after proving herself in combat, the focus would shift to her professional accomplishments rather than her role as a pioneer. Instead, she felt trapped between those who saw her primarily as a woman invading a male space and others who reduced her to a symbol of progress. The complexity of her position became even more apparent during a training exercise with Allied forces, where she was the senior American officer working with British SAS and French Special Operations units. The mission required close coordination between the different national units, and Sarah found herself navigating not just tactical challenges, but also cultural assumptions about gender roles that varied significantly between the participating countries. The British and French officers were professional and respectful, but Sarah could sense their curiosity and occasional uncertainty about how to interact with a female special operations leader. Some seemed to default to more formal behavior than they would normally use with male counterparts, while others appeared to be testing whether she would demand special consideration or accommodation because of her gender. Sarah addressed these dynamics directly during the mission planning phase, establishing clear lines of authority and communication that left no ambiguity about her role or expectations. Her approach was professional and straightforward. She would perform to the same standards as any other officer and expected to be treated accordingly. The Allied officers quickly adapted, and the exercise proceeded smoothly, but the experience highlighted how her gender continued to be a factor in professional interactions even at the highest levels of special operations. The training exercise was followed by a real-world mission that would test Sarah's leadership in ways she had not anticipated. Intelligence had identified a terrorist training camp in the mountains of Afghanistan where foreign fighters were being prepared for attacks in Europe and North America. The facility was hidden in a remote valley that could only be accessed through treacherous mountain terrain, requiring a multi-day approach march and precision assault by a joint task force. Sarah was selected to lead the American component of the operation, working alongside special operations units from 3 Allied nations. The mission profile was complex, involving coordination between ground forces, air support, and intelligence assets across multiple time zones and command structures. Success would require not just tactical excellence, but also diplomatic skill and cultural awareness. The team she assembled included both experienced veterans and newer operators who had joined the SEALs after the integration of women into combat units had become routine. Sarah was particularly interested in observing Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos, a female explosive ordnance disposal specialist who had recently completed SEAL training and was participating in her first major operation. Santos was technically proficient and physically capable, but Sarah recognized in her some of the same pressures and expectations that she had faced early in her own career. The younger woman was trying to prove herself, while simultaneously avoiding any appearance of weakness or special treatment, a balancing act that Sarah remembered well from her own experience. During the mission briefing, Sarah made a point of addressing Santos the same way she addressed all team members, with professional respect and clear expectations. She remembered how important it had been for her own development to be treated as an operator first and foremost, rather than as a female operator who needed extra guidance or protection. The approach march to the target area took 3 days through some of the most challenging terrain Sarah had ever encountered. The mountain paths were narrow and treacherous, with steep drops and unstable surfaces that required constant attention and careful movement. The team moved primarily at night to avoid detection, using night vision equipment and careful navigation to maintain their route while carrying full combat loads. On the second night, the team encountered an unexpected obstacle when a section of the trail had been washed out by recent rains, forcing them to find an alternative route that would add several hours to their march. Sarah made the decision to continue rather than abort the mission, calculating that they could still reach the target area within their operational window despite the delay. The decision proved challenging when Santos slipped while crossing a particularly difficult section of the new route, nearly falling into a ravine that would have been fatal. Sarah and another team member were able to arrest her fall and pull her to safety, but the incident highlighted the risks they were taking by continuing with a modified approach plan. After ensuring that Santos was uninjured, Sarah had to make another leadership decision about whether to continue with the mission or call for extraction. The terrorist training camp was operating on a schedule that intelligence had identified, and delaying the assault might allow high-value targets to escape. However, continuing would mean accepting increased risk for her team in challenging terrain. Sarah chose to continue, but she modified the team's formation and movement procedures to provide additional safety measures for the remainder of the approach. The decision was based on her assessment of the team's capabilities and the importance of the mission objective, but she was acutely aware that any casualties would be scrutinized more intensely because of her gender and leadership role. The final day's march brought them to within striking distance of the terrorist camp, which was located in a valley that provided natural protection from aerial surveillance, but also limited the defenders' ability to observe approaching ground forces. Sarah positioned her team for the assault while coordinating with allied units that were moving into position from other directions. The intelligence picture was more complex than initial reports had suggested. The camp housed not just training facilities, but also a communications center that coordinated terrorist operations across multiple countries. Capturing the facility intact would provide valuable intelligence, but it also meant that the assault would need to be executed with precision to prevent the defenders from destroying sensitive materials. Sarah's team was assigned to secure the communications center while Allied units assaulted the main training areas. The approach required a steep descent into the valley followed by a coordinated breach of the facility's perimeter defenses. The timing would be critical, as any delay would allow the defenders to organize resistance or destroy intelligence materials. As they prepared for the assault, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. 5 years earlier, the idea of a woman leading a special operations assault in Afghanistan would have been inconceivable. Now, it was simply another mission, executed by professionals who were judged by their competence rather than their gender. The assault began at 0300 hours with a diversionary attack on the camp's main gate, while Sarah's team infiltrated through the communications facility's rear perimeter. The element of surprise was complete, and they were able to breach the building and secure the sensitive equipment before the defenders could organize effective resistance. Inside the communications center, Sarah's team discovered intelligence materials that exceeded all expectations. Computer servers contained detailed records of terrorist operations planned for targets in Europe and North America, including specific attack plans and the identities of operatives who had been inserted into Western countries. The information would save countless lives and disrupt terrorist networks for years to come. The successful capture of the facility was accomplished with minimal casualties among both the assault force and the terrorists, many of whom surrendered when they realized they were surrounded by superior forces. Sarah's leadership during the operation was noted by Allied commanders, who praised her tactical decision-making and the professionalism of her team. During the extraction phase, Sarah had an opportunity to speak privately with Santos, who had performed exceptionally well during the assault despite the earlier incident during the approach march. The younger woman expressed appreciation for Sarah's leadership and mentioned that having a female team leader had helped her feel more confident about her place in the special operations community. The conversation reminded Sarah of her own early experiences and the importance of mentorship and example in helping the next generation of female operators develop their careers. She realized that her role as a leader extended beyond mission accomplishment to include paving the way for others who would follow in her footsteps. The mission's success generated significant attention within the special operations community and beyond, with intelligence officials describing it as one of the most valuable counterterrorism operations in recent years. Sarah received formal recognition for her leadership, but she was more satisfied by the professional respect she observed from her peers and superiors. Following the Afghanistan operation, Sarah was selected for assignment to the National Security Council, where she would serve as a special advisor on counterterrorism operations. The position represented a significant step forward in her career, offering opportunities to influence policy and strategy at the highest levels of government. The transition from operational duties to policy work was challenging, requiring Sarah to apply her tactical experience to broader strategic questions about national security and international cooperation. She found herself in meetings with senior officials from across the government, contributing insights from her field experience to discussions about resource allocation and operational priorities. Her new role also brought increased public visibility, as she was occasionally called upon to brief members of Congress and participate in public forums about military operations and national security. Sarah approached these responsibilities with the same professionalism she had applied to her operational duties, focusing on facts and analysis rather than personal experiences or political considerations. However, the public attention also brought renewed focus on her gender and role as a pioneer in special operations. Magazine articles and television interviews often emphasized her historic significance rather than her policy expertise, frustrating her desire to be recognized primarily for her professional accomplishments. Despite these challenges, Sarah found satisfaction in her ability to influence decisions that would affect the safety and effectiveness of special operations forces around the world. Her recommendations helped shape training programs, equipment procurement, and operational procedures that would benefit future generations of warriors. The experience also provided her with a broader perspective on the role of special operations in national security strategy. She gained appreciation for the complex political and diplomatic considerations that influenced military operations, understanding how tactical successes like the Kismayo and Afghanistan missions fit into larger strategic objectives. As she settled into her new role, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Oregon to the corridors of power in Washington. Each challenge had prepared her for the next, building the skills and experience that enabled her to contribute at increasingly senior levels of responsibility. She knew that her career would continue to be watched and analyzed, serving as a barometer for the integration of women into the most elite military units. The pressure was constant, but manageable as long as she remained focused on excellence and professionalism rather than symbolism or politics. The future held new challenges and opportunities, but Sarah was confident in her ability to meet them with the same dedication and competence that had carried her through her operational career. Her legacy would ultimately be measured not by her gender, but by her contributions to the security of her country and the effectiveness of the warriors who served under her command. 5 years later, Captain Sarah Chun stood before the Senate Armed Services Committee in a packed hearing room on Capitol Hill. The morning sun streamed through tall windows as she prepared to deliver testimony that would influence military policy for decades to come. Her dress blue uniform bore the ribbons and decorations earned through years of combat operations, but today her weapon was words rather than firearms. The committee was reviewing the integration of women into special operations forces, and Sarah had been called to provide her perspective as one of the most senior female officers in the SEAL community. Her testimony would address not just her own experiences, but also the broader implications of gender integration for military effectiveness and national security. Chairman Senator Robert Williams gavelled the session to order and introduced Sarah with a summary of her distinguished career. The biography included her role in the elimination of Abdul Hassan Kismayo, her leadership during the Afghanistan Communications Center raid, and her subsequent service at the National Security Council. However, Sarah knew that the real focus would be on her insights about the future of special operations. Captain Shun, Senator Williams began, you've served in combat operations before, during, and after the integration of women into SEAL teams. What has been the most significant impact of this integration on operational effectiveness? Sarah had prepared extensively for this moment, reviewing studies, statistics, and her own observations from years of service. Senator, the most significant impact has been the expansion of operational capabilities. Female operators bring unique skills that enhance mission effectiveness, particularly in cultural environments where male soldiers cannot interact with female civilians and in situations requiring different physical profiles for infiltration and intelligence gathering. She continued, drawing on specific examples from her experience. During the Kismayo operation, my team's success was due to tactical flexibility and adaptability rather than any gender-specific advantages. However, subsequent operations have demonstrated that mixed-gender teams can access intelligence sources and operational environments that would be closed to all-male units. Senator Patricia Hayes, the committee's ranking minority member, leaned forward with her next question. Captain, there have been concerns raised about unit cohesion and the potential for romantic relationships to compromise operational security. How have you observed special operations units addressing these challenges? Sarah nodded, having anticipated this line of questioning. Senator, professional standards and military discipline address these concerns the same way they address any other potential sources of distraction or compromise. Clear policies, consistent enforcement, and leadership by example have proven effective in maintaining unit cohesion and operational security. She paused to let her words settle before continuing. The SEAL community has always demanded the highest standards of professionalism from all operators, regardless of gender. Those who cannot meet these standards, whether male or female, are not retained in special operations units. The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours, covering topics ranging from physical fitness standards to equipment modifications to international cooperation with allies who had different policies regarding women in combat. Sarah answered each question directly, supporting her responses with data and specific examples from her operational experience. Senator Michael Torres raised a question that went to the heart of ongoing debates about military policy. Captain Shun, some critics argue that the integration of women into special operations represents social engineering that compromises military effectiveness in favor of political correctness. How do you respond to such concerns? Sarah had heard similar arguments throughout her career, and her response reflected years of consideration and experience. Senator, military effectiveness must be measured by results rather than preconceptions. The operations I participated in have succeeded or failed based on planning, training, execution, and adaptability. Gender has been irrelevant to mission outcomes when personnel meet the required standards and perform their assigned roles professionally. She continued, drawing on her policy experience at the National Security Council. Our adversaries do not limit themselves to male-only forces. They use women as suicide bombers, intelligence operatives, and commanders. Artificially limiting our own capabilities based on gender would be strategically short-sighted and operationally counterproductive. The committee's attention shifted to questions about training and selection standards, an area where Sarah's experience provided valuable insights. She explained how the integration process had required careful attention to maintaining standards while ensuring fair evaluation procedures that accurately measured the skills and attributes necessary for special operations success. The selection process has always been designed to identify individuals who can perform under extreme stress, adapt to changing circumstances, and function effectively as part of a team, she testified. These attributes are not gender-specific, although they are relatively rare in any population. The key is ensuring that evaluation methods accurately measure these qualities rather than reflecting unconscious biases about gender capabilities. During a brief recess, Sarah was approached by several committee staff members who expressed appreciation for her testimony and asked follow-up questions about specific policy recommendations. She found these informal conversations as valuable as the formal hearing, as they provided opportunities to address concerns and misconceptions that might not surface during public questioning. When the hearing resumed, the focus shifted to international perspectives and cooperation with allied forces. Sarah drew on her experience working with British, French, Australian, and other special operations units to describe how different countries had approached gender integration and the lessons that could be learned from their experiences. Our allies have generally found that operational effectiveness depends more on individual competence and team cohesion than on gender composition, she testified. Countries that have successfully integrated women into special operations have focused on maintaining standards while eliminating barriers that were not directly related to operational requirements. Senator Williams asked about the broader implications for military culture and tradition. Sarah's response reflected her deep respect for military heritage while acknowledging the need for evolution and adaptation. Military traditions that enhance effectiveness and unit cohesion should be preserved and strengthened, she said. However, traditions that limit our ability to recruit and retain the best possible personnel or that prevent us from adapting to changing operational environments must be evaluated critically and modified as necessary. As the hearing concluded, Sarah reflected on the significance of the moment. Her testimony would become part of the official record and would influence policy decisions that affected thousands of current and future service members. The responsibility was enormous, but she felt confident that her recommendations were based on solid evidence and genuine concern for military effectiveness. Following the hearing, Sarah participated in a series of meetings with Pentagon officials, congressional staff, and military leaders to discuss implementation of the committee's eventual recommendations. These sessions were less formal, but equally important, as they addressed practical questions about training programs, career development, and resource allocation. The discussions revealed the complexity of institutional change within large organizations like the military. Even when there was agreement on general principles, translating those principles into specific policies and procedures required careful consideration of countless details and potential unintended consequences. Sarah's role in these discussions drew on all aspects of her experience: operational expertise, leadership skills, policy knowledge, and personal insight from her pioneering career. She found herself serving as both an advocate for continued progress and a voice of caution about the challenges and risks of rapid change. One particularly important meeting involved senior leaders from all special operations units, discussing how to share lessons learned and best practices across the community. Sarah emphasized the importance of mentorship programs and professional development opportunities that would help female operators navigate the unique challenges they faced while building successful careers. The first generation of women in special operations has had to figure everything out on their own, she explained. Future generations should benefit from formal programs and institutional support that help them develop their skills and advance their careers based on merit and performance. The meeting also addressed ongoing challenges related to equipment, facilities, and operational procedures that have been designed with all-male units in mind. Sarah's input helped identify areas where modifications were needed to accommodate diverse personnel while maintaining operational effectiveness. As her Washington assignment neared its end, Sarah was offered several career options that reflected her unique combination of operational experience and policy expertise. She could return to operational duties with a major command position, continue in policy work with promotion to senior staff roles, or transition to civilian positions that would allow her to influence military affairs from outside the uniformed services. After careful consideration, Sarah chose to return to operational duties as the commanding officer of a special operations unit that would include personnel from multiple services and allied nations. The position represented the culmination of her military career, offering opportunities to apply everything she had learned about leadership, strategy, and international cooperation. The assignment would take her back to the field where she had begun her career, but with responsibilities and perspectives that had been shaped by years of increasingly complex challenges. She would lead not just individual missions, but entire campaigns, coordinating between military units, intelligence agencies, and diplomatic missions to achieve strategic objectives. Her new command included several female officers and enlisted personnel who saw her as both a leader and a role model. Sarah was conscious of this responsibility, but determined to focus on professional excellence rather than symbolic significance. Her legacy would ultimately be measured by the success of her missions and the development of the people under her command. The transition back to operational duties brought Sarah full circle to where her career had begun, but with a much deeper understanding of the strategic context within which tactical operations took place. She approached each mission with appreciation for its broader implications, while maintaining the focus on immediate objectives that had always characterized her leadership style. During her first major operation as a commanding officer, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey from that muddy cave in Somalia, where she had eliminated Abdul Hassan Kismayo, to her current position of strategic responsibility. Each challenge had prepared her for the next, building skills and experience that enabled her to contribute at increasingly senior levels. The operation was successful, demonstrating that the principles of planning, training, and execution that had guided her throughout her career remained valid regardless of the scale or complexity of the mission. More importantly, it validated her belief that military effectiveness depended on competence and professionalism rather than adherence to outdated assumptions about gender roles. As she watched her diverse team of operators prepare for their next mission, Sarah felt satisfaction in knowing that she had helped pave the way for a more inclusive and effective military. The barriers that had seemed insurmountable early in her career now appeared to be historical artifacts, overcome by the persistent application of high standards and professional excellence. Her story was no longer unusual or remarkable within the special operations community. Women serving alongside men in the most elite military units had become routine, judged by their performance rather than their gender. The integration that had once seemed revolutionary was now simply part of military culture, accepted by a new generation of warriors who had never known anything different. Looking toward the future, Sarah saw continued opportunities for progress and improvement, but also new challenges that would require the same dedication and adaptability that had characterized her own career. The mission would continue, carried forward by professionals who shared her commitment to excellence and service regardless of their background or personal characteristics. The mud and darkness of that Somali cave seemed like a lifetime ago, but the lessons learned in that moment of decision and action continued to guide her leadership and inspire her dedication to the warriors who served under her command. Her legacy was not just breaking barriers, but demonstrating that excellence knows no boundaries when standards are high and opportunities are equal.